Today's question is, what is the creepiest confession, most disturbing that you have heard from an otherwise normal person?
Unfortunately, this is about me. I told a friend and they were pretty creeped out about it, and I'm quite embarrassed of it really. I've never done it again, and it's really changed the way I talk to people online. My Reddit account has some very easy to follow steps to find out who I am. So I only post positive things, very tame critiques, and that's about it. My account has my name that I share with a lot of other things, previous online accounts, etc. But my story is about how I cyberstalked a BF3 hacker just because he was being annoying. When BF3 became free to play, I joined a TDM server. I have quite a few hours on BF3, 300 plus, and I really enjoyed it. To see a full server again was quite fun, and I was kicking ass. Then this guy joins. This guy starts kicking ass, heading-shotting me from across the map. I don't think too much of it, but I ask, "Hey man, is that all skill?" He responds it is, and he's streaming. BF3 isn't a very popular game, so it took less than a minute to find his Twitch stream. Just look for a picture of the same map being played, and his was the first. Clearly hacking, boxes on screen, snapping headshots, the whole 9 yards. So now I had his stream. I called it out in game, linked the stream, and he left, was booted a minute later. In that minute he was joking about how, as the game was free, he could just get another account and keep going. On his stream he wasn't talking, but he was typing. He was typing to another streamer. Now his stream just had me as a viewer. I was pretty bored and he had my attention. He hadn't really ruined my gaming experience, it was just, who is this douche? His Twitch name matched his Twitter name, which he used to promote his stream. His Twitter was filled with bully, trolling posts at people, and he was just a smarmy douchebag. No photos though. His name was included, but it wasn't a very unique name. Now I have a Twitter account and a name. This is where it gets even worse. I start to trawl his posts. Going back months, I find a post that links him to a town. I Google search the town and his name, bingo. A post about Australia Day and how he thought this town had put on a really bad show, just saying how bad it was, etc., and trolling people in the comments. It was a small town and people were biting, "You should organize it if you think you're so great, etc." He was eating it up. But I had his Facebook. Start looking into his profile. Posts were private, but the Facebook URL closely matched the Twitter, so I knew it was him. The profile pics were nondescript, ban pages, random shit like that. But this guy had a girlfriend. Her profile was public and she kept tagging him in posts. It was so cringy. "I love you, boo. You are my world, the most beautiful girl I know," etc. The guy and his girlfriend were two ham planets. He was the epitome of keyboard warrior. He had a fedora wearing lens flare edited profile picture. It was actually just perfect. It was just so satisfying that this guy was the stereotype personified. I could have left it there, but I had to go a step further. I created another Twitch account just to let the guy know I found him. I posted his Facebook details in the chat of Twitch. There was like max 4 people watching him stream, but you could see it pop up on his stream chat, him pause mid-game and just not do anything for like 5 seconds. He closed the stream. I have a couple posts. One friend stabbed someone and the person did not survive. He wasn't charged because he claimed self-defense, but he's all fucked up about it because he thought the person was armed and they weren't. When I was 13, my 16-year-old friend told me she used to shit herself until she was 13 in an effort to keep her dad from molesting her. She threatened to call the cops, and her dad committed suicide with a shotgun in their living room. My ex told me that he fantasized about his 7-year-old neighbor. That was 10 years ago. He's fucked up and I know it. This same ex told me his uncle used to fall asleep with his genitals in his mouth when he was a kid. I've had a pretty colorful life, but I don't want to air my personal dirty laundry. I'll update if I think of anything else. Edit. I got one more for ya. My friend has long dreads and had a pretty bad case of lice. When he came back from traveling, his roommates wouldn't let him in the house until he was lice-free. Being poor, he couldn't afford treatment, so he dunked his head in some sort of gasoline. Then he lit a cigarette. He has no nipples. Most of his body is skin grafted. He still has dreads. He is lice-free. Oh, what the heck? I'll keep going. My friend passed away a year ago. His fuck buddy at the time wanted to inject heroin into his veins for him. She overshot it. I honestly thought he was clean, so I was a bit surprised. I was at a friend's farmhouse and watched them stomp a baby opossum to death. I was told they also hacked a raccoon with a machete. This is the same person that was excited about their new taser and keep looking for small critters, mostly toads, to taste. He would then throw their paralyzed bodies in the fish pond to drown. Edit. More. A friend of mine is a production of rape. He has serious identity issues as his mother is Native American and his father is white. He absolutely despises white people. My best friend that passed away confided in me that his girlfriend from back in his home state, we meet in college, was pregnant and giving the baby up for adoption. She also had leukemia, but beat it. I know during the pregnancy she needed a blood transfusion. He told me he didn't really care about her anymore. He was struck by a car and she had just given their baby up for adoption. They started a lengthy court battle to get back custody, and I never kept in touch with her enough to find out the outcome. Another good friend confided in me that his girlfriend was repeatedly sexually abused by her brother. She could always get uncomfortably perverted in public, so I was really surprised to hear that. Oh, and a friend of mine told me her parents wiped her ass for her until she was 12, and they melted her ice cream before she could eat it because they were afraid it was too cold. She also told them that her car broke down. She needed $10K to buy another. It was fine. She lied and used the $10K to pay for her girlfriend at the time's sex change operation in Thailand. Had an absolutely charming, incredibly smart-looking close friend for a few years. It took me about 5-2 years to find out everything about her life was a lie. Even the smarts. She'd read some detailed article on a subject and present ideas as if they were her own, but never knew anything deeper. Pretended to speak many languages by secretly watching a foreign movie with subs on, then translating some cool scenes to us. She made up a story about her father abusing her mom to make excuses for failing her uni exams, lied to people about being a medical student to look smart, and would give them very dangerous advice. Lied to her family about being a brilliant medical student, don't know if they believed her, and about many, many other things. She was an incredibly fun person, but an awful toxic friend. Still, I was afraid she'd lose her mind completely if I revealed her secrets to everyone. So I only quietly told the people she was abusing or potentially putting in danger, so she couldn't do any damage anymore. Several times I tried to talk her into going into therapy, but I stopped. She was in complete denial about me knowing everything. I was so afraid she'd kill herself if she found out what everyone thought of her. One day, she just packed her things, said goodbye with a hug and a huge smile on her face, and left for another country to pursue her medical studies. I've kept evidence of all the craziness in case it comes back someday. I'd say that if you genuinely pay attention to people around you, you'll find out many creepy stories like this. Some people see friends come and go, and actually never have any idea of what's going on in their lives. Back in my early 20s, I'm 41 now, I had a small group of close friends. We'd get together after work and on weekends to smoke weed or drink. Sometimes someone would bring someone new. One new guy, I'll call Scott, started to hang out frequently on weekends. Seemed normal, but mostly quiet. One night, Scott gets stoned and tells the group how a neighbor abducted him and his younger brother at knife point from the woods behind their house and forced him to perform sex acts with his younger brother while the neighbor watched. If they balked or refused, the guy would cut them or poke them with the knife. Scott's telling this story like he's no longer aware we are even in the room. He's looking through us. He tells us that the guy lets them go after like 8 hours. When Scott gets home, his little brother runs and hides, so he goes and tells his mom what happened, but she doesn't believe him and claims he's making it up to excuse the two boys for being late. The next day, Scott's little brother still wouldn't come out of his room, so Scott tells his dad, then takes his dad and shows him his little brother's bleeding rectum. Scott tells us everything goes to hell from there. The cops are called. The story has to be told over and over again. Scott's parents' marriage explodes due to his mom not believing the story or even informing the father about it. Scott's mom tells everybody remotely close to the family the details, which embarrasses and humiliates both the boys. Scott says he tried to block it out, but his little brother is tormented by it despite tons of therapy. Parents divorce and Scott's dad has custody. Scott continues telling us how his brother blames him for everything for years. The little brother was sodomized by Scott multiple times during the ordeal. So a couple years go by and Scott's little brother is guilting him the whole time. The little brother decides the only way he can forgive Scott and get past it is if he gets to do to Scott what Scott was forced to do to him. Guilts Scott into it through a lot of blame and then threats of suicide. Afterwards, the younger brother tells the parents and immediate family what he did to Scott. Then the brother decides he can't live with what he did with Scott. Brother writes in his suicide note that he can't understand how Scott could live with himself after what Scott did to him because he can't live with what he did to Scott. The younger brother hanged himself. Scott tells this whole story to us, then he curls up in fetal position and starts bawling his eyes out. Everybody is just stunned. We did bong hits till Scott cried himself out, then the dude who first brought Scott and takes him home. We never see Scott again. This is the Matryoshka doll of confessions. My grandmother confided in me that her husband, my grandpa who died the year I was born, told her about his most worrisome night in the armed forces. He and she were stationed with the USAF near Las Vegas when one night one of his crew members, a direct report, knocked loudly and anxiously at their door. It was the middle of the night, and the man was frantically begging my grandpa to come help him because he really messed up this time. He dressed, kissed my grandma goodbye, and went outside with his airman to talk. He was a wreck, pacing back and forth, crying. My grandpa tried to comfort him. "Son, I can't help if I don't know what's wrong," she recalls him saying. The airman suggests a drive. They drive out into the desert, with my grandpa getting more and more concerned as the story unwraps. Turns out the airman's fiancée had left him. She wasn't cut out for the life, and he was so upset about losing her that they'd got into a fight, and he'd left her in the desert. He needed help making it right. It would kill him if his folks knew he'd laid hands on a woman. My grandpa hears his confession, tries to comfort him, and tells him to drive him to her, that they'd fix it. He should face his punishment, but it would all be okay. The airman is relieved and he begins thanking his boss and crying in appreciation as they drive deeper into the desert and then pull off the road. It's dark out and he can't see much, but Grandpa says, "Okay, where is she?" His airman leads him over to a big, low cactus a ways from the road and says, "Here she is." Lying in the sand is the fiancé, choked to death. His worst nightmares revealed. All his hopes are dashed about getting a hurt woman to the hospital. He tries to show no worry or concern or emotion, just to be reassuring. He's over an hour outside of town with a murderer. The airman wants to bury her and can't stop talking. How deep? Should they move her? How long will it take the animals to find her? If only she didn't try to leave, he wouldn't need shovels. My grandpa stood in the middle of the desert with a raving murderer and buried a body in the sand while he reassured her killer that they'd somehow make it okay with the authorities. They then drive back into town and stop off at a diner, where my grandpa has to call for the military police to come arrest the airman. Grandpa doesn't return for a day or two, assisting the cops in finding the body, while worrying my grandma sick. She said that night changed him, that he carried that shovel for life. I had an ex. He wasn't my ex when he shared this. Tell me about how a few years before we'd met, He had a friend who would pretend to hypnotize him. He said that he played along so the guy would think he was really hypnotized because he thought it would be funny, or he didn't want to upset this guy who was his friend. Well, the guy hypnotized and tells him to pull his pants down and bend over. They're probably 13 to 14 years old. So, my ex does it. He said he was afraid this friend of his would be upset he was lying to him about being hypnotized. Then, the guy proceeds to have anal sex with my ex. My ex is male. To remove any confusion, finish, tell him to pull his pants up, and does the whole "when I snap my fingers you'll be unhypnotized" thing. The ex went along with all of it, never said a thing about not being hypnotized, and even went back multiple times and let the dude do it repeatedly. Having that story in my head has bothered me for years. My ex called it rape, but it was so hard to accept that at 16. I mean, he went back. He let it happen. He knew it was going to happen each time he went back. How can that be rape? I even offered to him that having a homosexual experience isn't anything to be ashamed of, but he insisted it was rape. Who am I to argue? Fear and desire to be liked makes people do a lot of weird things, including walking back into a terrible situation like that over and over. I just never understood. He's doing great now as far as I know, and I wish him the absolute best. He's a great dude. I hope he's dealt with whatever that was if it still weighs on him. Hopefully I'm the only one of us who still ever thinks of it, but I'm sure that's wishful thinking. I had subconsciously begun to realize a relative was becoming a very cold, manipulative egotist, but it didn't click until she told me plain as day that a psychic had told her weeks in advance that an elderly relative was going to die soon. She essentially had weeks to prepare for it, was ready when it happened, and it did happen. The psychic said it would, then stepped up as the rock of the family, supporting everyone as we grieved. I can still hear her mother explaining how proud she was of her for being there the way she was, and feeling my heart break as she said it, knowing it was all just a game to this relative to get in her good books. She took us all through the grief, me included. I still can't believe she straight up told me it was all just a plan for her to feel better about herself. She then explained she went back to the psychic immediately after the death, but the spirits basically said, too soon, which was unintentionally funny now I think about it. She went back a few weeks later, and the spirits congratulated her for how amazing she was during that whole time. She then said the spirits had nothing but criticism for the rest of the family. I basically realized then I was listening to a narcissist. She cut me and a few others out of her life a few years later over something minor. And by cut me out I mean she turned her puppet husband and kids against me and pretended like the whole fight was so emotionally traumatic for her so her mother would take pity on her over us. My favorite was I was driving and started thinking about the fight, and I became so upset I had to pull over. I thought I was going to throw up. She's slowly but surely driving the rest of the family away from her too now, by sheer force of her ugly personality, her sickeningly fake marriage, and lack of respect for anyone she can't take something from. I just despise her for sharing that secret plot with me, because now I have to hold on to it permanently so as to not devastate my own grandmother. A friend of a friend came to my house a few times. Generally a great guy, fun to be around and had a great sense of humor. So one day, my friend brought this guy over and we had a fun night, drinking a bit and playing apples to apples. The guy has a little too much and starts hitting on my friend, much to her discomfort. So, I take him outside, and we talk for a while as I wait for him to sober up some. Fast forward half an hour, to when the guy announces that he trusts me enough to tell me about the worst things he'd ever done. I think, this'll be something commonplace, like theft, or carjacking, or hiding your sister's birth control and a few months later finding out you're gonna be an uncle. No, guy proceeds to tell me that he's killed 2 of his friends. Then he goes into great detail about how he was bored and stoned for the second one, and just broke the guy's neck and proceeded to copulate with his eye socket, just because he wanted to know how it felt. Never got caught. I'm thinking, what the fuck? I've got a family here, and I let him into my house. Couldn't react that way, though. The guy was obviously seeking redemption or something like that. I told him nice things to placate him and gently sent him home later. Never invited him over again. And this is the end of today's video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to comment an anecdote or experience similar to the topic of the video. Leave your like, share if you like the video, and lastly, don't forget to activate the little bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Bye-bye.